we are going to talk about capacity design. And, as we grow our level of success, there seems to be this expectation that we're just going to feel overloaded. And that stress and feeling that sense of overwhelm and anxiety is just kind of part of the experience to be expected. But I believe that we can have incredible levels of success without the destructive stress. And that is what I'm going to share with you today. And you know what? This is something where even the most senior level people, I actually remember recently I was talking with, we just started a group program, and there were just a small group of managing directors from across the country, part of an international firm. And one of the gentlemen, he said, Allison, listen, I just can't do this anymore. I am so at my capacity. Like I know my family's supposed to get the best of me, but the truth is that when I get home, they're getting my leftovers, and it's not a whole lot. And if I don't figure something out, I'm going to quit. Like I can't keep going with the same level of stress. And he thought he was being really vulnerable. And the truth is, he was like exactly the same as every one of us. Like this sensation of feeling overwhelmed is not unique. And he went on to apologize. And I often find this interesting. He said, I'm really sorry because this is first world problems. Right? Anybody ever apologize for complaining about your stress levels when you're like, yeah, and here's the reality. There will always be someone who has worse circumstances than you, but that is about perspective. That is not an elixir for your pain and suffering and the challenges that you feel. And so I think that this level of stress, there were some commercials. I'm out of Canada. And so shout out to all the Canadians here on the call. We had a thing called Bell Let's Talk. And it's an annual event that it just encourages people to talk about mental wellness and mental health and really remove the stigma. And one of the commercials said that 1 in 4 Canadians are experiencing anxiety regularly. Like, that's a problem. That is a problem. And the challenge, and you may have felt this way, similar to my clients, is like, the answer is I've got to quit. I've got to do less in order to get rid of my stress. And I'm going to show you exactly why that is not the case. And it's really interesting how stress actually gets blamed for a lot of what we're doing in our lives, when in actual fact, stress is not the problem. It's a part of the problem, and we need to change our relationship with stress. But really, it's about your personal capacity. And personal capacity is everything that you do, think, feel, and be each and every day. And it's not the same as time management. I'm going to show you why that will become obvious. It's not the same as just energy management, although energy management is also important. It's everything combined. And how we approach our capacity is generally on default. We've had decades of reinforcing our patterns, reinforcing our relationship with stress. And so if we don't do something significant to fundamentally shift how we're relating with all the challenges around us and the never-ending to-do list, then if you were to imagine everything you went through for the last 6 months, your sensation of stress for the last 6 months. So like that takes us through the holiday season, Halloween, Labor Day weekend, the summertime. So just thinking back on your life with that. If you were finishing your days and feeling like my other client was feeling, where he's like, I'm done and I have nothing left to give to the people who I care about the most, because I'm constantly putting out fires all day long. If you felt that the last 6 months, if we don't do something differently now, the next 6 months will be the same. Now, the circumstances will change, the problems you face will change, but your relationship with stress will remain the same. And as you look at your capacity, if you have a relationship with stress that makes you feel overwhelmed and like you're anxious and like you can't find a way to focus, that's what you're in for. But it is possible to change it. And this, if you were to think about your capacity as a cylinder, and so we kind of fill this up with everything that we need to do, think, feel, and be each and every day. And if we get too much, then we are like, it's kind of like our cylinders are full and we start to burn out. And the way I feel like this, and maybe you can relate, is it's like you're suffocating on your success. Like I that's how it feels for me. Like I can't get down into my body, right? And yet on the other end of the spectrum, if you don't like have anything to do, think, feel, and be, especially if you're driven and you love your work, which I know so many of us do, then you're going to be bored. It's like, give me 2 weeks on a vacation, a little sightseeing, and then I want to get back to the work that I need to do. And so often people will see like, I've got to quit my job. And it's funny, a friend of mine, she's like, I can't take it anymore. I'm so stressed at work. I gotta stop this. I'm going to quit. She quit her job. And one of the reasons she blamed for wanting that she felt so stressed was because she had this really toxic behavior from a boss. Okay. Have everybody been there at some point in their career? Maybe somebody who just was a micromanager and just didn't make you feel inspired and empowered to do your best work. Anyway, she ended up quitting and she went over to a competitor, which is great. And 3 months later, that same boss came over and was working for the same firm and became her boss again. So quitting is not necessarily the best answer either, because wherever we go, we take our patterns with us. And so this sensation of being right at the top of our cylinder, I have been there. And in actual fact, feeling that sensation of suffocating on the success that I was having in my life was the reason that this work that I'm sharing with you today actually came to be. And just to give you a sense of who I was before this moment that I'm about to share with you, I had a Post-it note on my pillow, or not on my pillow, on my mirror in the bathroom. And it said, to deserve to hit the pillow. Now, what I meant by that was that if I was brushing my teeth and I was tired and ready to go to bed, and I felt like I hadn't done enough to serve other people, to contribute to society, to push someone else's agenda, to raise money for the organizations I was volunteering for, then I wasn't allowed to go to sleep. Anybody else putting that level of pressure on themselves? It's like you feel so guilty about relaxing and taking care of yourself, when in actual fact, you're probably doing more than most people are doing, and you would be able to do even more if you were well rested and didn't have that guilt. So I was sitting at my neurologist's office at the hospital, and I was desperate. Like, when you think of the poster child for what done is, burned out, I was, do you know what an ugly cry looks like? And then if you were to match that with like a high-pitched squeal, and then a bit of hyperventilating with a few delicately sprinkled in F-bombs at a pretty significant volume, that was me at the hospital with my neurologist. And I was like, I cannot take it one more second. I am in so much pain. I am not leaving here until you fix me. See, 2 years before that appointment, I had a very simple cyst. It went in for surgery, and unfortunately things went wrong. And it actually created neuropathic damage in my pelvis. And it doesn't even matter like what it feels like or anything, because everybody's pain is different. It's their own experience. But essentially it's like a a serrated edge knife just kind of twisting into my body. And that started on March 5th, 2007, and has never left me. So here I was 2 years after that surgery. I had been in and out of the hospital on all these medications. This was my 9th specialist spanning in the 2 years, and nobody had an answer for me. And I was so desperate. And he leaned forward and he said, Allison, listen, he's looking all very doctorly, right? With his white coat on and his reading glasses. Anyway, I'll never forget him. Allison, you need to understand what's happening. You are never going to work full-time again. It's time that you reevaluate your expectations for your life, because your pain will never go away and you will never be off pain medication. And it's time that we talk about you going on disability. And through that desperation, I knew that giving up was not the answer. I knew that there had to be a better way. And he said, well, if you're not interested in that, then you are going to need to learn how to be resilient. And it gave me just enough hope that I could leave that hospital. And I kind of left like a bit defiant, like, I'll show you how to do this, right? I'll figure this out. And off I went. And I went on this journey to figure out how to be resilient. And I've since come to realize that he was half right. Not only did I need to learn how to be resilient, I think that underestimated the reality of the situation. What I needed better problem solving for the human experience. See, I was so full in my capacity cylinder. And of course, I didn't have this languaging back then, but I was so full and I was drowning in all my do, think, feel, and be, judging myself and all of that, that when the surgery happened, when my pain was at its height, I didn't have any wiggle room for life to happen. And so then what was happening is I had 6 people in my life died really in a short period of time, a whole bunch of injuries. It was just and have you ever felt this way? And I think we've all gone through times in our life where it's just like punch after punch after punch after punch. And it's like, oh, I can't take it anymore. And if you were just to draw to your mind the last 6 months and some of the challenges you've gone through, and maybe they haven't been really difficult, but please do not underestimate how much the consistent propping up of people in your life is if you're the leader and you have to make everybody's mood feel good, right? And then, the pandemic here in Canada, we're still hanging out with that, are we going to have to wear masks? Are we going to all of this, the regulations? It's we're not designed to continually face this level of intensity. And so if you're feeling a sense of overwhelm, if you're I can't take it, you're not alone. But let's think about how do we actually fix this? And to do that, I'm going to go over to my whiteboard for a second. And if you were to think of this as your capacity cylinder, to think, feel, be, and do, and there are really only 3 things you can do to fix this. So if you're way up here at the top, well, and we've got one client, we were talking when we started coaching together. She's like, I'm more overflowing. I got stuff everywhere. Okay. So we only have a couple options. Number 1, we can create a bigger cylinder, expand our capacity. And this is a long-term strategy. So ways that you might be able to do this are become healthier. Maybe if you have some sort of a chronic illness or something like that, overcoming that. If you're going through grief right now, that might be will be shrinking your capacity cylinder. So we can expand it. That's not what I'm going to talk about today, because I want to give you quick wins, ways that you can find those moments of angst and eliminate them from your life. So the next thing we can do is if you were to imagine all of the things that you need to do, think, feel, and be here in your cylinder. And I've just put a whole bunch of little squares in there. And Linda touched on this earlier when she introduced me, but you can do what so many productivity experts talk about, which is you can delete, delegate, or park things until another time. Okay. So we just get them out of our cylinder. So they're no longer taking up room. And while I love this idea, if you are successful, there is a certain level of stuff. There's a certain amount of things that need your brain, your body, and your brilliance, right? Like you can't delete your way to that beautiful sweet spot of performance, productivity, profitability, and personal fulfillment, which is found when we sort of equalize at that perfect little spot for you in the middle of your capacity cylinder. This, though, does have some merit to alleviate some of the pressure in your capacity cylinder. I remember there was a client who called me and we just started working together. And he's like, Allison, he said, I am like working late at night, put the kids to bed. You know, my wife and I, we have our little chat, and then I go back to the office while she goes to bed. And I start working to get the things I didn't have time to do during the day done. And I said, okay, well, we need to figure out what's going on. Situational awareness. See, that's the beginning of the problem-solving framework. I said, for the next week, I just need you to track, like with a little Post-it note beside you, everything that you're doing, right? Like if you're taking a phone call, if you're, whatever it is, just write it down. And then next week when we meet again, we can problem solve to figure out how do we address that. And he called me at the end of the week. And he was laughing, or not at the end of the week, at the end of the day one, the next day. And he's like, yeah, I don't need a week. I can see where my time, where my capacity was disappearing. Phone calls that weren't necessary, water cooler conversation that was just taking way too long, getting caught up in his team's drama instead of putting a cap on it, right? Like, scrolling social media accidentally. Anybody been there? Like accidentally, it's like 45 minutes gone. Oops, there it goes. And so finding those things, it was like so easy to do it. So I'm going to challenge you at the end of today for the next week. And please email me when you are done this. And I'd love you to just take note of how you're spending your time. Where are those moments of angst that are happening in your life? And let's look at it and say, is there anything I can delete or delegate or ignore and park until another time? But if that's not the answer, then what is the answer? Well, this is the secret to freeing your capacity and getting your emotional and mental capacity. See, each of these things that we do, think, feel, and be are taking up a certain amount of your bandwidth. And what I want to show you how to do is to shrink the amount of capacity everything you do takes from your capacity cylinder. So let's talk about this. Okay, so we can expand it, we can delete, delegate, ignore, or we can shrink the amount of capacity each issue consumes. And I'm going to show you how to do this by explaining the ice cube that became the snowman. And this is important. Now, and by the way, this is part of a bigger program that I do, and I just want to manage expectations. I'm showing you little pieces of it, and then I'm going to give you some resources at the end that can help you with that as well. But this concept of ice cubes that became the snowman goes like this. Number one, we have, if you imagine everything you need to do in a day as an ice cube, okay? And your job is to melt it as efficiently and effectively as you possibly can. Now, that is probably not as difficult as we think it may be, right? Like actually doing the job is not that hard because you're good at your job. what happens is we add the human experience and we pack it around the ice cubes that need to be melted. So first off, if we, and it's all represented by this great big pile of snow that every one of us has access to at any moment. Obviously, it's imaginary. You're not carrying around snow unless you're up here in Canada, in which case it's everywhere. You've got this mound of snow. And the first representation is of misplaced emotion. Misplaced emotion. So this would show up like, say you're worried about cash flow, or the company that's one of your biggest clients has just made a decision to stop doing external. They're going to cut back. And so now it's like, okay, my biggest client, what just happened? That happened to me, by the way. So it's a great example. Postponed. And so you're concerned about that, but then say your child comes up to you and says, hey, mom, like, can I have a snack, or can we go out and play? And you snap at the child, who's now like leaving the room and going, what just happened? I just asked for that. Now, I understand irritations can get a little bit taxing and can be really difficult, but that's misplaced emotion, right? It can be maybe somebody like a supplier has sent a note and you kind of are like in this state of feeling really emotional, and you interpret what's happening on that email from the place of, I'm really scared about X, Y, or Z, and then you just sort of fire back. Okay, so then we end up creating these new obstacles and new challenges that come out of it because of misplaced emotion. The next piece of snow. So now we've got our ice cube. Okay, it's in there. We've backed it around. Let's say it's just, we got to do a report. Okay. And then we do that. And then we go in and we dunk it in for a little bit of negative storyline. Now, I am not somebody who believes that everything needs to be rainbows, unicorns, and magic fairy dust level positive. Okay. I actually think that we need to neutralize our storylines, because our brains don't get caught in a positive cycle loop, right? Nobody's just worrying about what would they do if they win the lottery, right? It's like when we have that doom and gloom and we deny it, then we ultimately end up making everything harder. Or if we try to go so far to the other side and we make it like all positive, it doesn't serve us any good either. So now we've got the misplaced emotion, the negative storyline, and then one more layer of snow to wrap around our ice cube, our barriers to performance, like worry and judgment and comparison and, not setting boundaries, or even worse, setting the boundaries and not upholding them. There is a very long list of these barriers to performance. And what happens is we end up creating these snowmen wrapped around our ice cubes, but the thing that needs to be melted is still just the ice cube. But now we have to melt all the snow to go around it. So thinking about your life, perhaps there are some tasks that are on your to-do list if you're using a traditional to-do list, and they just keep getting pushed and pushed and pushed. Or maybe there is you have this perfect day set. I'm going to do this and this and this and this. And then one of your best friends calls and they're in crisis and they need to help you, or they ask you for your help to prepare for a presentation of their own. And you focus on their stuff instead of your own. Right? So we've all had those sorts of situations happen. But if you think about that and you think about, okay, doing the thing was not that hard, but it's all the misplaced emotion. And then maybe you resent that your friend's always asking you for advice. And then we add on the negative storyline. She's not going to use the advice anyway. So why does she waste my time? And then the barrier to performance of procrastinating on your own work and not setting a boundary, that becomes, if you think about how much it steals from your capacity cylinder, that becomes the thief. And what we need to do is we need to find those pieces, those snowmen, and interrupt the patterns that we've reinforced for decades to create smaller snowmen. I remember I was sitting down with a friend of mine who's a vice president locally of an international firm. She sits down and I can tell she's in a huff, and I'm like, how's work going? And she's like, it's awful. Oh, okay. Tell me what's going on. She goes, head office sent down a report, and those people, they don't know what's going on in the ground. They have no idea how busy I am. They do not understand. They don't get it. And it's time that I go and look and find a new job. Wow, that is big news. Tell me, how long is this report going to take you? She leans back in her chair and she says, 15 minutes. I'm like, so you spent 3 weeks irritated, resentful, ticked, procrastinating on a 15-minute task? That just doesn't feel like it's a really good idea. And she's like, yeah, you're right. So she ended up doing the task that afternoon. But here's the thing, all of that snow came from somewhere. We just have to have better ways to address it. That's the key. Now, I know I would love to be having questions, but because this is a confidential space, the questions are held till the end. So I'm purposely not looking at the chat box right now so that we can dive in. But if you have questions, please be sure to put them in there because that will be important. So when we look at this model, if you think about your capacity cylinder and you have all these things that you need to do, think, feel, and be, or even just the things you need to do, but you're wrapping the misplaced emotion, the negative storyline, and the barriers to performance around them, then what happens is we end up having more of our capacity being used for something that really we should have just done and melted really, really, really quickly. This concept I know resonates when a week from now somebody's going to send me a picture of an ice cube and a snowman, right? And it's like, because you can be in a meeting and you can lead this, right? You can say to somebody, what's the real issue here? Because we're so often trying to solve for the bigger piece, but I want to show you how stress relates in here. Okay. Because there's chances are you've been taught to, choose your stress, like to fix your stress. Like, I'm going to skip ahead here. Like we tend to go, I have a problem. Here's the solution. But solution first thinking actually won't help you solve your capacity cylinder misequation. It's really quite interesting because what we need to do first is we have to get really compassionately curious and self-aware, because what works for me is not going to work for you. And so often when we're taught, my things are all out of whack here, but that's all right. The problem-solving framework, what's happening? What's my ice cube? How am I reacting to what's happening? And potentially, how am I making what's happening harder than it needs to be? And based on the knowledge of those two, then we can choose the right solution. And you have probably been taught certain things to manage your stress. And I'm just going to go through here to here. And I went searching for answers like so many of us do. And we've got to rest, we've got to sleep, we've got to exercise, we've got to have nutrition, self-care. Yeah, but you know what? If you're already at your max capacity and you want to add on exercise, it's not going to Like where, what, I got nothing left for that. And it's like, but if we can shrink those moments of angst, if we can take those snowmen and we can make them smaller, we won't have them taking up and stealing so much of our capacity cylinder. And then we make room for these really important critical six of a healthy lifestyle. Right. And this is the secret. It's like, what are those what are those snowmen that are being made? So part of the stress piece is, and I am cognizant that we're going to have to go to Q&A in a second, but I do want to share this with you. You know, there's a part of you potentially that may feel like I feel, which is like, I love stress. Like, not the overwhelming, I feel overwhelmed, I cannot focus kind of stress, but I love a good deadline. I love chasing a goal. And if you actually think about how stress was intended for us to be, it's like we were supposed to just like, you know, you're going along, you're eating your berries, and all of a sudden there's a bear that comes like out in the garden, right? Obviously, and you're just like having a nice little picnic, and a bear comes charging at you. All of the stress hormones are supposed to come to the surface so that we're completely inspired and focused to get to safety. But then what happens is, back in the old days, the bear would go away and our stress hormones would settle, and we would come back out and we would start enjoying our life again. Except in our world where the capacity cylinders are so full and there's so much to do, and we're building these snowmen and making them more complicated, then we don't have any room to bring them back down. And so people are acting in like from a stress hormonal perspective that we're firing on all cylinders, like like as if a bear is chasing us around the office. And that's where we create the destructive stress, is when we go too far. So we've got to figure out where's that balance between the good, empowering stress, which is created by setting a goal, giving it a timeline, and having accountability. And when we do those three things in the right doses, we can actually take those ice cubes that we need to get done. We can shrink how long they take to get done. And we don't add on the extra snowmen. Then we can melt those ice cubes really effectively and be in flow in that sweet spot of performance, productivity, profitability, and personal fulfillment. But as soon as it goes to the other side and we start adding on misplaced emotion, like think even of like something like doing the dishes. Like sometimes doing the dishes is like, it just doesn't end, right? Like every morning I have to empty out the dishwasher, and I'll tell you, I used to resent it. I'd be like, these dishes, right? And it's like, okay, I'm just adding angst to my day unnecessarily for doing something. And so it's like, okay, how do I neutralize that experience? And in actual fact, how can I make that even better to be an energizing moment in the day? Because it's something that I can't delegate out or delete in my life, but it was consuming an irritation or creating unnecessary destructive stress. And so now I use it as a moment of gratitude. And I sometimes use it as a challenge. And so it's like, oh my gosh, look at the meals that we had. What a blessing that I have access to this food. So I'm using it to streamline. So if we actually write all those moments of irritation and angst, you know, one of my clients, it's laundry. She has a toddler and a firm, and she just like can't keep up with the laundry. And it's her job to do the laundry because her husband looks after other things. And it's like, okay, well, how do you stop being resentful and irritated and changing that storyline that's going around that little task? And so she did. She like noticed that was one of the things, right? Because in the first week, I always want to have people just track what are those irritation moments. And then we start looking at what snow is getting piled around them. And now she just does the laundry, and it's not a drain, it just is. And we can put that into all of our business, all of our life, like aspects, all of our relationships to streamline. But you may have noticed there was a third bucket on that stress piece. Because when we think about our capacity cylinders, and I'm so good at managing stress, like I live this, but there were some times recently that I couldn't stop the stress. And I was like, started to create destructive stress by judging myself for it and being irritated and like, what's wrong with me? And this is where we want to be really compassionately curious. And I started to look at it and I went, okay, because I always thought like the good stress was also covered the things that were true stress, but in actual fact, it's survival stress. So one Saturday morning in September, I was just, doing some writing on my new book, The Stress Illusion, that'll come out in this year. And my phone rang and I was like, that's weird. Why is mom calling me? She just left 20 minutes ago. And she says, Allison, I've fallen, there's blood. I've hit my head. And every hormone in stress, fight, flight, freeze, tend to be a freezer sometimes, came flooding through me. And I was like, oh my gosh, stay there. Of course she didn't. She climbed up the rest of the chairs to go inside to try to get somebody. But because I understood that there was stress that is legitimate, the bear is chasing us, we're in danger, and didn't judge it, I was able to call the ambulance, get them over there and whatnot. She's been 8.5 weeks in the hospital and is doing phenomenally well now, by the way, and probably healthier than even when she went in. So I'm really, really proud of her healing journey. But I think sometimes we underestimate how when we feel those huge, true stress situations, it's like you can consider them a noose that goes around your capacity cylinder, right? It like takes away your available resources. And so often I find people who are high achievers will go through something like that in the background. Maybe somebody in their family has a diagnosis. They have a diagnosis. There's, they're going to the hospital every night and pretending like everything is great in the morning and just like during the day and like stuffing it down and not giving themselves the space and the grace to truly process the things that matter the most. And that's the survival stress. And so we can't judge it. The only thing we can do is to figure out how can we better ride the waves so that that noose doesn't get even tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter around our capacity cylinder. Because if we just keep trying to go, then we do what happened to me, where I ended up having the surgery. It basically said, I believe in many ways, it took me from working 18-hour days to having 2 to 5 hours of functionality a day. And because I became obsessive about how do I design my days? How do I design my capacity so that I'm not allowing the rabbit holes of negative storyline to take a hold, or procrastinating on the things that need to get done, or allowing other people to take my time and energy because I feel obligated to do that, for those of you who are also obligers. And instead was like, all right, let's design the functionality that I have in a day to optimize. And I will tell you that doctor was wrong. I actually call him Dr. Wrong. He ultimately, I ended up doing this. And I noticed that when my destructive stress and I become more negative and I get all sort of swirling in the destructive stress cycle, my pain increases. But as long as I keep my snowmen to a minimum, and I'm very strategic about how I design the capacity in the overall day, I am not on pain medication for my nerve pain. I am working full time. And I did not go on disability. And not that that would have been a problem if I did, because those resources are there when they need to be used. But I wanted to still have a fun, like a successful life, even with that chronic pain noose strangling my capacity cylinder. So what do we do with this? And I know we have to go to Q&A. Number one, for the next week, I challenge you to get very compassionately curious about your situation and where are the moments of angst, the things that pull me in a direction that I just don't like, where you start to feel that suffocation. Write it down on paper, because if we are clear about what exactly is happening, we can then solve it. Then get compassionately curious about how you're reacting to what's happening and potentially how you may be making it harder than it needs to be by building snowmen instead of just melting the ice cubes. And then we go into solution activation. Because based on your self-awareness, you will be able to come up with a better solution.
Lovely, Allison. Thank you so much. That was really well done. And I love the illustrations. They're memorable. They're easy. They're concepts that we can grasp and put our arms around. So grateful for you. It doesn't look like anyone's added any questions into the chat. But I do want to just note for all of you a couple things that I think will be really helpful. One, all of you will be receiving a recording of today's event. So in email, over the next few days, you'll receive a copy of today's event, just a link to the recording, and you'll receive all of Allison's contact information, her offers, lots of ways to work with her. So if you have questions, if you want to dive in more deeply, if there's anything about these concepts, these ideas, this framework that you would like to dive into a little bit more deeply, no problem. We are really open to that. We want to serve leaders. We want to lift women up. We want to counsel them and cheer them on and help them literally overcome any obstacle that they may be facing. And if you're a leader and you live a vibrant life, who doesn't have issues with stress at times, destructive stress? We all do. We all have time, I think, challenges balancing our life. So if that describes you, and if you can relate to the stories that Allison just offered us, then know that you have the opportunity to reach out to Allison for a one-on-one deep dive, just a quick 15-minute chat to a full hour consultation. So we'll send all those opportunities to check in with Allison and ask questions in the email that you'll receive. So again, Allison, I can't thank you enough for your incredible wisdom, your insight, your support of leaders from all over the world, and for being such an entertaining and inspiring speaker. Ladies, and was I not right that Allison is just dynamite? She's just remarkable. So I am so grateful for you, Allison, for sharing so generously your insight, your expertise, but also for keeping all of us, I think, on the edge of our seats. This was really entertaining, really informational, and for me, very inspirational because you offered so much hope. So thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your week, and look for that email where you'll receive a link to today's recording, as well as lots of offers and resources from Allison so that you can take the next step. All right, everyone. Thank you so much, and we will speak soon. Thank you. Oh, and thank you for all the thank yous in the chat. That's just lovely. So appreciate everyone's good comments. And really appreciate that, Shannon. Thank you so much. Stephanie. Oh, thank you, Yvette. Thank you, Linda. Cynthia, Buva, Mary Beth, all of you. Thank you so much for the beautiful, beautiful sentiments. All right. Thank you, Allison. Thank you all. And we will speak soon.
Yvette, if you had a question there, you did.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So the snow is, yes, sometimes the negative storyline. And so our goal is to neutralize it. And we can't neutralize it by counterbalancing it to go like totally positive. The better option is to come up with 2 or 3 alternative storylines that could be plausible. So we want to move it closer to the center, because if our brain is left to its own devices, we can very easily go very negative. Okay. But that's only one layer of the snow. The other is that misplaced emotion. And then it's the barrier to performance. But if you'd like, I actually have another video I'm happy to send, and I will absolutely share it with you. And please do send me an email, and we can have a chat, and I can clarify for you.
Love that. All right, guys. Thanks so much. We'll speak soon. Thank you, Allison.
Bye.
Bye everyone.